Hello and welcome to the Phoenix 5 Info Show. I'm your host, Lieutenant Vince Lewis, coming to you once again from Phoenix Police Headquarters in beautiful downtown Phoenix. Welcome back to the show, my co-host, PIO Sergeant Rob Scherer.
Good to be here, boss.
Good.
Yeah.
It's always good to see you.
It's good to see you too, and I love having our guests. These are some of my favorite ones.
Well, this is an interesting episode. This is another historical episode where we brought back special guest, former PIO Sergeant, current Records Sergeant,
right,
and the official Phoenix Police historian. Welcome back to the show, Sergeant Vinnie Cole.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be back.
Good. So there's a very special milestone that we're going to come up. Rob, you want to throw us right into it?
Yeah. So the first, I guess, and we talked a little bit about this before, recording, but it's our first documented or the first officer line of duty death that we had as the Phoenix Police Department in Haze, Burch. Let's go through some of that story and things about it, being our historian, and then we'll go from there as far as the rest of the list and really get into the story.
Yep. So Haze Burch lost his life right around where Chase Field is now on February 5th, 1925. And obviously 100 years ago now. He had quite an interesting life prior to, although it was short. He was from Payson, that's where he was born, and had worked some jobs for the city, including being a volunteer fireman. Where our professional standards building is now, there used to be this giant placard that listed all the fire department members at the time, and he's listed. He had an unsuccessful run for Maricopa County Sheriff, and came into the Phoenix Police Department around the early 1920s. In 1925, he's working kind of a night shift. Things are a little different then. The Phoenix Police Department doesn't even have radio-aided dispatch at this time. So it's kind of roaming the city. And he comes across two people that are siphoning gas out of a car that's parked on the side of the road. Newspaper accounts at the time list him as automobile patrol, so I'm assuming he was in a patrol car, but what I do know is he was by himself, and contacts them. What he doesn't know is they're on the run from multiple crimes, multiple murders of police officers throughout the country, and they're kind of coming through Phoenix. Ostensibly, their vehicle broke down or they ran out of gas, and this was their means to do that. They were brothers. And Haze made a contact with him and started to cuff one, and the other one pulled out a firearm and shot him. He sustained, from what I've been able to read, 2 gunshot wounds, one through his hand and then one in the abdomen. Prior to contemporary or modern science, abdomen or even a core gunshot wound it can almost definitely spell a death sentence. But he survived. So this shooting happened shortly after midnight, and he's taken to St. Joseph's Hospital. Now, a sadder twist to this is his family resided at about 5th Street in Adams. And if you know the layout of Phoenix, you know that's just a few blocks north. The family was awakened by the gunshots, because after Haze was shot, he returned fire unsuccessfully, and it woke the family up. And they could only imagine what occurred, knowing where he worked, knowing there wasn't too many people working that night. So units arrived to the scene. I'm sure people are calling it in. Again, he had no radio communication at that time. The Phoenix Police Department started using radio as a shadow of what we know it today in the 30s. So other officers arrive on scene, and he's kind of doubled over. I think they find him, he's on his knees, and he says, "I caught him trying to steal gas." Now, while it's primitive in the 1920s, seemed forever ago, they still had means of sharing information nationally. And the department was able to obtain some information about the people they thought may have done it, and Haze actually identified him. He ended up passing away that evening. The 2 suspects were eventually apprehended. They had made their way, the newspaper accounts I had found said that they had made their way to Tempe, and basically the town marshal of Tempe and a posse, for lack of a better term, caught him in the Buttes and took him into custody.
The Tempe Buttes?
The Tempe Buttes, yep. So they didn't make it too far. At at the time, they had to be cognizant of where they housed the suspects because there was an effort from the citizenry to take them out of jail and kill and hang them. But they were eventually moved to Florence. The one brother that was believed to be the triggerman was executed, hung in Florence the following year, and then the other brother was extradited for another murder of a police officer and was sentenced to life in prison.
Sergeant Cole, our department historian, going through the details of what we know of the death of the first Phoenix fallen officer, line of duty death, Haze Burch, recapping those details for us. Thank you for that. This is 1925, so we're at the 100-year anniversary. So February 5th of this year would be the 100-year anniversary of it. What can you tell us about Phoenix, the city or the community at the time, or the department as it relates to the community? What kind of things, how would you compare then versus now? I know there's a lot of, that's a loaded question,
Right.
but tell us a little bit about Phoenix at the time, maybe a little bit about the department at the time.
So the department was still kind of in its infancy. There's some bones of the skeleton of the department, a skeleton of the department that we would recognize today. They're starting formalized. This isn't like the 1630s in the Boston Watch. It's much more formal. They were starting to implement vehicles. Again, I got that from a newspaper article that said he was an automobile patrol. Today we would just call that regular patrol. And I think in the 20s, Phoenix was making the transformation from a Wild West town to kind of a sleepy small town, but it was growing in either way. So they were adapting to that. The Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, their jurisdiction was getting smaller. The Phoenix Police Department was expanding. By 1910, we had started developing motors and things like that. So
The motorcycles?
Motorcycle patrol, and they had very few. Early department photos, there's one or two motors in them. Now, who's to say there wasn't a third shift guy at home sleeping? But the department traffic bureau, for lack of a better term at that time, was very small. But there were things they were doing moving forward to what we recognize today as our own department.
Yeah, it's. I'll tell you, Vinny, it is profound every time we get you on, and it's almost. Producer Pablo holds us to that 14-minute thing, but it kind of limits really getting into everything you know. I love sitting here and just watching you talk because you have that passion about it. Not only you're a Phoenix police officer, you have that servant's heart, but even talking about Haze and some of the things he did prior to being a cop and then being a police officer. He really was that epitome of that person with that servant heart. He was here to serve that community, did so. Unfortunately, what happened 100 years ago happened, but still in the midst of being shot, he's still in that mode of taking care of his community, taking care of what he could at that point, and identifying that suspect.
Yeah,
pretty profound.
We'll see those stories recently. We've had officers that one such officer, Officer Bullis, after she was shot, she's giving information about the suspects in the ambulance on the way to get treated. So these officers who are, they lose their lives, or they're seriously physically injured on duty, they don't stop being police officers, which is amazing. So Phoenix was incorporated about 1881. So this is about 40 years past that. And then about another 40 years after that, you helped us understand the story behind David Johnson, who was another line of duty death. It was just recently added to our roster of our roll call of the fallen.
Right.
And that was not far from where this took place.
Right, literally just down the street. So 2nd and Jefferson is where that occurred, 2nd Street and Jefferson. And then this would have been, I've seen it say 8th Street, I've seen it say 6th Street, somewhere in the area of where Chase Field is now. But again, in reading the accounts, the suspects fled south. In my mind's eye, when I think about it, I think Chase Field's there. But you have to keep in mind, completely different landscape. And there was a neighborhood there. So they fled through there and went down to the river bottom. But it is interesting to see how close these things are. And sadly, as Phoenix expands, our list gets a little more dense as you move further, it's closer to contemporary times.
Tell us about the grave marker for Officer Burch.
So there's a organization of retired police officers a couple of years ago who got together and raise funds to put a flat marker that basically says, Haze Burch is marked as the first line of duty death for the department. He's got a very contemporary gravestone at Greenwood Memorial Cemetery. contemporary for the time he passed away, and it was in need of repair, and they were able to do that as well, to get the funds together for that. So they did a great job, and it was nice to see everyone come together to make that happen.
So with you being a historian, I always like to delve into this part because this is your passion. Like you talk about reading newspapers and things like that. I'm not saying it's on duty or off duty, but you can tell it's your passion that this sort of finding that historical element. You tell the story and a lot of us can listen to that story and go, oh, that's kind of similar. I can understand that. Information sharing, but then stuff that's so not having a radio, we would be lost without anything. We wouldn't know what to do with ourselves. When you go through some of this stuff and how does it impact you personally, finding some of this stuff out, and learning more of that story? How many articles does it take to get through? How do you find this stuff? Like what builds this passion in it? And when you find some of this out and learn some of the story, how does that impact you personally?
Well, it depends on what I'm researching. The stuff I've done for the department recently, like the Star Johnson thing, it's a somber topic to read. But I always try to draw similarities and parallels between then and now. And like you had mentioned, LT, after Haze was shot, he probably knew he wasn't going to survive. Stomach wound. I mean, everyone hopes for the best, but he probably knew he was in trouble. But it was important to him to get that information out. So parallels between the two. And although this is 100 years ago, it's not terribly that long. I mean, it's not that long ago. And it draws a bridge between then and now, the officers then and the officers now. And it adds to, who we are as the Phoenix Police Department, the pride in the uniform in the department. And it kind of enhances that because those kinds of people served throughout its inception.
Yeah. Well, we could learn more about this and other fallen officers on a national level by visiting the Officer Down Memorial page, odmp.org. But if you want to get into more of an intimate setting, you can visit the Phoenix Police Museum in the old City Hall building. It's on the first floor, facing on the south side of the building. Inside of the Phoenix Police Museum, which is free to open, but they'll take a cash donation for your participation, there is a memorial room. And it's a beautiful, quiet setting where we have markers of each of the officers who have given paid the ultimate sacrifice in service of the community. So that's another site that you can go to. You can also visit phoenix.gov/police and click on the In Memoriam tab. Sergeant Cole, I want to thank you for this, keeping our history alive and making sure that we never forget. Sergeant Scherer, thank you. Yeah,
no, I appreciate it. Vinny, this what you do is the culture, like people, it's hard to understand. We can try to say it, but the culture really delves from a lot of the work you do in bringing up that historical and that connection.
Thank you.
It's imperative to know this stuff. It brings all of us, in this building and throughout in the city, brings us together, and it's all through culture and remembering those that have paid the ultimate sacrifice.
Sergeant Cole, thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
I just want to remind everybody that you too can help solve crime in your community by sending tips to Silent Witness. Visit silentwitness.org or call 480-WITNESS. You can catch the video versions of all of our episodes of the 50 Info Show on our YouTube channel. Go to youtube.com/phxpd. You can find us on all social media platforms. We are hiring. Go to joinphxpd.com. And remember, we're all in this together.